looking at Scripture and the hermeneutics, and so we benefited from that. So we got into contextual theology. If any of you were in Latin American countries and or Central America, liberation theology, then womanist theology, then mujerista theology, then feminist theology, and ecological theology, contextual theology, all the difference in the world. And some of our seminaries stop at scholastic theology, scholasticism. Imagine the different stage of consciousness that it creates. It's an orientation to liturgy. We were told now to just experiment. I know it's a terrible word, but how many of us sat around tables like this or your coffee table in your dining room, shared with a friend, a priest friend, you all shared liturgy. You said the words of consecration. You baked the bread. We learned, we knew, we understood the priesthood of believers. You can't take that out of the, once you experience that, it's hard to put it back in the toothpaste, whatever it is. The new understanding of the ecumenical movement. I grew up, there were Catholics and non-Catholics. Now look at that, listen to that language, huh? Catholics and non-Catholics. Then it became Catholics and Protestants. It only took a while later to talk about Catholics and then Baptists, Lutherans, you know, Unitarians, and then heavens, Buddhists and Muslims, etc., were sort of yet out in the future. Now we were told we could learn from other religions, correct? We could have Lutheran Catholic dialogue. Then de Mello, how many of you remember the Jesuit de Mello, who starts to write his books, and all of a sudden the Eastern understanding starts to become part of our prayer, our spirituality. And we all differed on this, and I understand that, depending on where you were, who you were with, what you were reading, because we were starting to split up. But we still had some collective times together where I think we moved this. And then we adapted the concept of authority as service. That was part of renewal. We didn't just go bury sticks because we were told to anymore, and that funny little story that they used to tell us. It now became you had individual discernment, and you did do it together with people. You still had some obedience, but it wasn't the same any longer. And the leader wasn't the one, I think I might have gotten, yeah, okay, both of these come together, but the concept of authority, it wasn't just because they were positional. The person in authority had to sort of earn it. I mean, they were of service to you. They weren't just the big poopah up there that you had to obey. Now we're looking at service. Authority is no longer that legalistic look, but now we talk about discernment, and we end up having different kind of retreats as we develop that spirituality. Then we're told to develop a social conscience. You know, I grew up with a me and God pie. I was happy in my closet. I mean, I loved just talking to God up there, you know. Who cares about you all, you know? It just wasn't in my thinking. Now we're told to develop a social conscience, and it was a deepening awareness of our contemporary life. So Gaudium et Spes says, don't be outside the world, you're in it. You're in it, and you are to be sensitive to all the joys and hopes and sorrows of all the people of God. Major shift. Now, think about when this was happening in the 60s. So real quickly, look at when we're developing at the same time as civil rights, anti-war, nonviolence, feminist movement, gay lesbian rights begin, social justice, systemic change, human potential movement, and holistic health. All that stuff is starting in the 60s. And depending again where you were, what you were teaching, like I created a feminist history course when I was teaching in high school in 1971. I was a draft counselor when I finished my degree work at St. Louis, right during the Vietnam War in 68, 69. So depending on where life put you, you were shifting in renewal at the same time as these incredible shifts were happening in our society. Talk about graced moments. And it doesn't matter if you covered all of them or none of them or one of them. You were in the milieu. You were in a very major kind of shift in our church as women religious. And so what it did is it helped us because we were developing more democratic movements, human rights. And because all of a sudden we knew everybody had a right. We started to discover that it didn't matter if you were male or female, if you were black or white. We had rights. And then you get evolution. So Charles Darwin saying, we all came from the same ancestor. Oh my heavens. Radical shift, radical shift. Quantum physics starts to totally reshape how we think of things because it's a complement to Newtonian physics. So rather than isolated atoms, now the theory is where the smallest parts of reality are packets of quanta, all connected. And so from the small, they're showing how we are a web of life. Now think how differently that is in terms of metaphor to silos, separation, isolated, competition. Now we're into connection, collaboration. Post-Darwinian biologists say collaboration is as important as competition. Those early organisms work together to move us forward. It's not destroying each other. It's a both-and kind of a thing. And then what we're discovering in cosmology. So when Edward Hubble discovered, through the use of his telescope, that the universe, all the galaxies are moving rapidly apart from each other, which actually was Einstein had that in his notebook, but thought it was too radical, so he erased it. That's a story I've heard, and I think it's true. Then Hubble and Einstein together saw what happened. So that allowed the scientists to say, okay, then if they're all moving fast, reverse that process. And so what they discovered, or what they're postulating, is that at the beginning, 13.7 billion years ago, there was a dense singularity of energy that had within it everything we needed for what we have today, the way that all those elements evolved. Talk about an awesome creation story. And so as it evolves, in 4.5 billion years ago, our galaxy takes place. A huge supernova explodes. An old star, getting dense, shrinking, think about images, huh? Explodes with such energy and seeds the part of the universe it lives in. Think about our elderly sisters. Dense, small, shrinking, full of energy, exploding, seeding the gray nun future. And so that becomes our sun and our earth. Well, this is wild, because now with cosmology and quantum physics, the largest, the smallest, mysteries reintroduced into our world. And they say about 95 to 97% of our reality we cannot see. It is dark energy or dark matter. So I postulate that we are ready to move again into this new stage of consciousness, and perhaps able to pick up through the lens of faith, but reinterpreted through the knowledge of science, new ways of expressing who we are, what our faith is, and who is the God that we so love in the gospel. And so I'm just going to skip this because I really said this to you already, in a way. But I think this is what women religious really have done, is that we already are aware that our consciousness is more communal, global, ecological, and cosmic. And we are living knowing science and faith can be reintegrated together. We can't go backwards. Young people and old people, desire a spirituality that we have, and I think that's the graced moment we've been given throughout this history, to which you are part of. You're going to shape it differently, you've experienced it differently, and you've experienced more personal graced moments, which we'll get to this afternoon. But I wanted to put this in this largest context, that you are part of this evolving history, in part of women religious within this last larger 50-year shift of consciousness. And we're not alone in this. There are many of our lay counterparts who are doing this from different perspectives. But we really have a gift if we can see it not as stuff we had to leave behind, but as that transcending and including. Okay? So I'm going to stop here for a minute and just take a few moments to get in touch with anything resonating or anything that you're resisting. Okay? And just jot it down for yourself before we go on. We're going to do another little piece before lunch. You can take it. Okay, hold on. Bring the mic to you, okay? I'll take Constance Marie here first.
I would like to know, what do you think of Ilia Delio?
What do I think of Ilia Delio? Do you know who Ilia Delio is? A Franciscan sister who is writing probably some of the best stuff that I've read on trying to figure out how do you look at Christianity and our teaching from an evolutionary perspective. The key person in all of that work is Teilhard. You know, Teilhard de Chardin is probably the one that everyone from whatever tradition starts with him to look at it. I think she's doing some excellent work. I've met her, I like her, she's a great presenter, and but I think her work is excellent. Sheila, oh yeah. Is it Sheila, I think?
I just wanted to break out in applause when you finished doing that incredible context. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
What I find, I certainly resonate, and I imagine that many of us do, with your own experiences and with the examples that you gave. I'm also saying to myself, can I still get this? Can I still understand this? Can I still take all this in?
Oh.
And will I remember tomorrow what you said? And I hope I will, because I think the context was very important. I'm sure that we've done this kind of context in other ways previously, but I just felt that the way that you brought it all around in an hour was pretty incredible and helpful. Thank you.
It is video. Where's the seal? Your video. Turn yours off.
Yes, it's okay. We told you to crap about that.
Okay. I just have to say that what resonated for me, and probably for Eileen and Karen and a few other people here, my experience working in Latin America during the time of the liberation theology opened my mind in a way never could have, I'm sure. And it had just changed me completely as far as peace working and war and all that, and accepting people as they are and who they are. And it was an amazing privilege to have experienced that in Peru, where I was. I just want to mention that because it just blew my mind open.
So turn yours off.
Thank you, because
Sorry. I'll move off. Take it off.
No, it's on.
thank you for sharing that. And I think for all of you, if you just recall, oftentimes it is an experience that starts that all of a sudden you get aware of what you used to believe. And I think when we hear the kind of, I would say really vile sometimes, rhetoric right now in our world, oftentimes it's because people have not had an experience in which they could experience the other, not as the other, and open enough to see that there's gift there, you know, so thank you for that.
I just had an immense gratitude that we had lived through these times and been exposed to all these advances in science and in social justice and all these different threads that we've been living during this time, and that our community has given us opportunities where we can change our mind and move forward, and that God's given us the grace to be open to these different movements. It was just a wonderful, as Eileen said, a wonderful recapping of everything, and the fact that we've lived in these times, and we've got to know about the new cosmology, and to know we're connected with the earth and that we're evolving. Sometimes I think of God as the evolver. Thank you. Thanks, Kid.
You know, what's I think is so important about this is that sometimes we remember what didn't go right after renewal. We get worried. We don't see people coming in. Even young women, though, have not lived through this. We are the end of an incredible period where we know both stages of consciousness in a way that I don't think anyone else, probably after me, will. And that's important because of what's happening in our world. People have to be able to talk to each other, and that's what this is connected to the dialogue piece. But you've got to talk beyond yourselves. And that's my little preachy thing, and maybe later, but as you're thinking about your future, you have gift to give. You've been giving it. I mean, so it's not, I don't mean like that, but I mean, there are still things that are so important for you to be about as women religious and as gray nuns. So, and I say that, my little homiletic, okay.
I was wondering if you have another circle. Modernity doesn't seem to capture what you're talking about, this contemplative dialogue or contemplative transformation, and modernity, age of reason, evolution. So is there a name for the next circle?
Thank you, Bridget. You know, some will say there's post-modernity, but I think that's why I called it an emerging stage of consciousness. I can't find exactly the right name. I don't, like, if you read Beck's work, it's a second tier kind of developmental process. You're an integral approach. So I didn't choose to use any one of those terms. Different people will be calling it. We're sort of like, because I think it's not yet there, but it's emerging. And I just left it for the sake of simplicity, modernity at that point. But thank you for the clarification. And yes, it's emerging. And probably you'll come across it talked about in some different ways, most likely, in the literature.
Here and then. Wait 1 second.
You know the refrain, what goes around comes around. And I think that the spiral sort of gets away from that because each layer is a little higher. And people think, oh, we're doing the same old thing, you know, but we're never doing the same old thing because life goes this way. It goes up, it's higher, it's wider, and it's different. And we need to honor the difference. We need to work with that difference to get the worthwhileness out of it. And I think that is something, an important notion about the spiral, that it's always new.
I can't underscore what, who is that? Barbara said, because we tend to, oh, we did it already. Oh, that's something we've done. You know, just those kind of things we get. If you're doing out of a new stage of consciousness, it really isn't. You really are coming around, you have to interpret it anew. And that's, and I do think we get into that habit, and you hear it all the time among people, you know, well, the same old, or learn from, that doesn't mean you don't learn from your history, but you are looking at things differently. If those of us who worked in Central America or contextual theology, you do not read scripture the same anymore, right? You still read scripture, but you're not reading it the same. And it's greater diversity, greater paradox. You can hold ambiguity as you complexify. So those stages of consciousness complexify. You transcend and include, and just like the letter becomes combined with others to become more complex thought patterns, that's what's happening. So thank you.
I just, too, wanted to thank you and tell you how much I resonated with what you said. And it kind of stirred up that passion that I used to have for doing things, exciting things, like getting involved with so many different causes that were going on during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I just wonder, how can we rekindle that and move that forward? I want to, and I don't know that I always have the energy to, but I truly believe that there is a place for us in this world and that we can attract people to our congregations, even though I realize there's so many opportunities for them today outside of religious life to do service, etc. But how can we bring that back and move it forward?
Well, hold on to that question, and I hope that's what emerges as we talk about grace moments and what things do you need to talk about as you move into your future, so don't forget it.
I just want to remind myself and all of us that we have a responsibility to be informed. We need to read widely and read wisely. So you've reminded me to do that. Thank you.
We probably have time for a little bit. I'm going to have us break earlier for lunch and come back then in an hour to do. I think, Diane, do you have it?
I just wanted to ask, do you think, and this goes back to somebody else, and I've lost the train here, but we don't have a name or a way to describe this emerging state of consciousness. Would you say that we have to live into it before we can actually name it?
Probably. I mean, I think you'll find names for it. I'm trying to think what Ken Wilber, I think it's probably integral in this. And I just didn't want to land on any because I think it is emerging and I think we're just trying to figure it out.
I think Anne Marie here.
Me too.
Oh, you want it, you mean? I'm
I want
sorry.
to say something
Oh,
too.
okay.
Anne Marie.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I guess what comes to me is a great deal of excitement, just hearing your whole historical perspective. And like I can resonate, I entered 3 years before you and had pretty much the same kind of background. And also the gratitude that I heard Sheila say, because in a novitiate, I remember those who were there, Mother St. Edward, having us go out to meet Daniel Berrigan. And when I reflect on that, I'm thinking, how amazing was that we were novices and we got to experience Daniel Berrigan. And that whole, just opened us up, like we were moving from 1963, through the Vatican. And I think that was like such a pivotal moment, even though I didn't understand half of what he said. And I had to go back and ask Joni Clark, what was he talking about? And she told us. And it was just like amazing to me. And then having worked with Star every day for a short period in my life was so transformational. And it excites me, when I hear, because we've been through this, and we all know it, we've experienced it, and we can become complacent, but as Grey Nuns, I don't believe that's who we're called to be.
Good. All right, Seal.
I just want to say, well, when you talked about mystery coming back, if we can't live with mystery, we can't handle this. I mean, I can't, and I think we can't, because there's so much that we can't put a label on.
You're right.
But it's exciting, and I thank you for what you just presented. It was wonderful.
Good. I like this excitement because that's what we want to go toward. You've done a lot of your, excuse me for saying this, sort of shit work. You're in a good place. You don't have to worry about a lot of stuff. You just have to worry about it, Julie. However, you can all turn that energy into this future, what we're going to talk about. All right, anything else? Otherwise, I want to take you to, have you just go to lunch now and come back in an hour, 1. And so I'll do this, because I think it's better now, and then you can keep talking, and I'm here, so you can just grab me or whatever. So any directions about lunch? Or we just go through the line? Okay, oh, there she is, Charlene. Any directions about lunch? Okay, she's saying yes. We can only let you have 1 sandwich or what?
You're going to share the 1 sandwich, okay? Actually, I wasn't going to say anything, but it probably would be helpful to say to you that the line starts at the far end and works its way towards the exit so that you can go down the corridor to the room where there are other tables like this set up to sit down. There may need to be some people who sit in a few of the other rooms which have some tables and chairs, or maybe even you want to come back here.